Paris, 1945. The war was ending, but the ruins still whispered. Buildings stood half-broken, lives even more so. Sergeant Thomas Hale stepped off the military transport truck, boots hitting the cobblestones like a familiar drumbeat of pain. In his breast pocket was a photograph, crumpled and worn. A girl with auburn hair and eyes like spring. Her name was Élise. He hadn't seen her in 5 years. They had met in 1939, when Thomas was a visiting student and Élise worked in her father's bookstore. She read poetry aloud when the shop was empty. He used to pretend he didn't understand French just to hear her explain the verses. When the war broke out, he returned to America. Letters followed. Then the letters stopped. Now, with the city scarred and uncertain, he had returned. Not for glory, not for medals, for her. The smell of ash and smoke clung to the city like a second skin. Paris still stood, but it was a different city than the one he remembered. The laughter was muted, the color drained. Still, somewhere within the rubble, he believed she was waiting. He found the bookstore, or what was left of it, en Rue des Pages. A gaping hole through its roof. Black soot where the poetry once echoed. Inside, only ashes. An old man next door remembered her. Mademoiselle Élise? She left, maybe a year ago, joined the resistance. They say she was captured. Or killed. No one knows. Thomas felt the air choke in his lungs. He wandered the streets for days, asking, searching, hoping. No one knew where the girl with the books had gone. Some said she was brave. Some said she was mad. But no one had seen her. He slept in barracks. But his dreams took him back to the tiny bookstore, to afternoons reading Rimbaud and laughing about the future. Until a child, a ragged boy with dirt-smudged cheeks, pointed to a church on the outskirts. She comes sometimes, lights candles, doesn't speak. He waited, day after day. He sat in the back pew of the half-crumbled church, listening to the echo of broken hymns. Then she appeared. Her hair was shorter, her steps slower, but it was her. He stood. Élise? She turned slowly. The recognition took seconds. Long, stretched seconds. And then her lips trembled. Thomas? She walked toward him as if unsure he was real. Her hand touched his jacket. Then his face. You're alive, she whispered. He swallowed the lump in his throat. I never stopped writing. I never stopped reading, she said. But then the letters stopped. I thought. They said Paris was lost. I didn't know if you were still. She looked away. Part of me isn't. He took her hand. Whatever's left, I want to find it. With you. She blinked fast. Tears didn't fall. Not yet. But the walls between them cracked. They walked for hours. Through streets where soldiers used to march. Past cafes that once overflowed with music and cigarettes. She told him about the resistance. About nights spent hiding Jews. Smuggling radio parts. Losing her father to the Gestapo. He told her about Italy. About brothers lost in snow-covered fields. About the guilt of surviving. In a small cafe where the windows were still shattered, they found 2 cups of coffee and enough silence to breathe in each other's presence. I'm not who I was, she said, fingers trembling over the cup. Neither am I, he replied. But I still love you, she said. He looked at her, truly looked. Then we start from there. Together, they cleared the debris of her father's shop. Stone by stone, dust into memory. They painted the walls, patched the roof. She cataloged the books that survived. He ordered more. They read aloud again. Baudelaire, Hugo, Whitman. Children stopped by to listen.
Locals donat a Xalbes.
The shop became more than a store, it became a place to heal. And through it all, Thomas and Élise rediscovered one another. Not the versions from the past, but the people shaped by war, by survival, by hope. One evening, as winter began to thaw, he proposed. No ring. Just a copy of Les Miserables, with a note tucked inside. For every dark night, there is a morning with you. She didn't cry. She laughed. Yes, she said, with the same voice that used to recite poetry in the bookstore. They married quietly, just a few friends, a cake made of ration flour, and vows whispered under stained glass. Paris was still broken, but love bloomed through the cracks. They had no children, only each other and the bookstore. And every year, on the anniversary of their meeting, they closed the shop early and walked to the old church, to light a candle, to remember the ashes, and to be grateful they found each other again. Paris, spring 1939. The world had not yet turned dark. War was only a whisper, and Paris was still golden. Thomas Hale had arrived as a foreign student from Boston, eager and wide-eyed. He studied literature at the Sorbonne but found himself spending more time in a small, dusty bookshop tucked between 2 cafes in the Latin Quarter. That was where he met her. Elise Laurent worked behind the counter with ink-stained fingers and a cat always sleeping near the register. She wore cardigans too big for her and glasses too small. She quoted Rimbaud like other people breathed. Thomas was smitten before she even looked at him. The first time he asked her for a recommendation, she handed him Baudelaire. "Don't smile too quickly," she warned. "It's beautiful, but it'll break you." He smiled anyway. Every Thursday, they shared tea in the back of the store. At first, they spoke of books, then of cities, of music, of childhood. She told him about her mother, long past. He told her about the sea, how it made Boston smell like memory. One rainy afternoon, he brought her a worn copy of Leaves of Grass. "I want to understand this," he said, "but not alone." She read it aloud, her French accent making Whitman sound like prayer. That evening, he didn't go home. They sat in silence until the shop closed, and in that silence was something fuller than any kiss. But the newspapers screamed louder each week. Germany, Poland, mobilization. Her father started whispering in back rooms. Friends disappeared into back doors. The air changed. In August, they stood on the Pont Neuf at midnight, watching boats drift down the Seine. "If war comes," he said, "I'll have to go. I know. I don't want to. I don't want you to either." He reached for her hand. "Write to me. I'll write until the pages run out," she said. He kissed her then. It was brief, gentle, but it cracked open something vast between them. She walked away without turning around, and he boarded a train that smelled like gun oil and goodbye. Paris, 1940. The swastikas came silently at first. Flags draped like crimson scars over balconies. Tanks grinding softly down the cobbled streets. The city that once danced now held its breath. Elise locked the bookshop. Customers stopped coming. Neighbors vanished. The cheerful boy who sold bread across the street was taken in the night. Her father whispered names she wasn't allowed to repeat. He had joined the early resistance, or what people called it before they had a name. He met with strangers in the cellar beneath their shop. He taught her how to speak without words. Every knock on the door made her stomach tighten. Then one morning, he didn't come back. 3 days later, his coat was delivered with no note. The buttons were torn. Blood soaked the lining. She didn't cry. She opened the shop the next day. Sold no books. Said nothing. But behind the counter, under a loose floorboard, a printing press began to hum. Leaflets hidden in the pages of novels. Passcodes tucked in margins. She became Élise the courier. She rode a bicycle with a false basket, wearing oversized dresses to hide coded messages. Every day was a gamble. Every breath was defiance. But at night, when the lamps dimmed and her bones ached, she reached for a small box beneath her bed. A bundle of letters tied in blue ribbon. From Thomas. His handwriting became her sanctuary. He told her about training camps, foreign languages, the smell of pine trees before battle. He asked about poetry. He never asked if she was safe. She knew why. Asking would make it real. Then, one day in winter, her landlady ran in, pale-faced. German soldiers were asking about a girl with auburn hair and American letters. Elise burned the ribbon first. Then the letters. She almost didn't breathe again. And from that day forward, no more letters came. She moved, changed names, worked in kitchens, cellars, back rooms. No books. No verses. But in her dreams, he still said her name like it mattered. And somewhere, under every stone she passed, she hoped for a word from him. Fall 1940. Spring 1942. Thomas wrote by candlelight, beneath tarp-covered tents and crumbling barns. France. Belgium. Then back to England. Each letter began with a question. "Are you safe?" He wrote of snow that never melted, comrades who never came back, and of dreams that kept returning. Elise, barefoot on cobblestones, reading poetry aloud with fire in her eyes. He never received replies. Each envelope he sent carried more desperation than the last. He changed addresses, added lines like, "If this finds you, write back anything, even one word." But silence answered him. Still, he kept writing. He imagined she was hiding, that her silence meant she was surviving. And when he began to feel the pull of fear, that she might be gone, he poured himself into letters even harder. He kept them copies, hand-bound in a leather journal marked, "To Elise, when the war ends." Spring 1942. It happened during a mission in the French countryside. His unit was ambushed. 3 men died. Thomas took a bullet to the shoulder and a shard of metal to the thigh. He was captured. At first, he fought, spit at his captors, tried to limp away. But they bound him and dragged him to a camp near Strasbourg. There, silence became everything. No letters, no news, no names. He stared at the walls, dreamed of verses. The one that returned to him most often, even in ashes, we find the shape of what was once whole. He repeated it like a prayer. For her. For himself. He wrote letters in his head. Every day. To Élise. Winter 1942. Summer 1944. Élise now lived as Claire Martin, a laundress in the 13th arrondissement. But beneath the fabric and soap, she ran messages, locations of rail movements, names of informants, blueprints of bridges. Once, she smuggled dynamite sewn into coats. She trained new recruits, boys barely 16, girls with hands that shook but eyes like steel. The day she was captured, it was raining. A wrong turn, a Gestapo checkpoint. The officer searched her basket, found a map sewn into the lining. They didn't ask questions. They hit her until she bled. Then darkness. Summer 1943. Thomas was still alive. Thin, scarred, but alive. He shared a bunk with a medic who traded drawings for rations. They planned escapes in whispers. One night, during a storm, a wall collapsed. They ran. Only Thomas made it. A passing unit found him 2 days later, unconscious, feverish, clutching a water-damaged letter. Dear Élise, he was sent home to England to recover, but he begged to return to France. Paris, he said, I left something behind. August 1944. Paris rose like thunder. Barricades, flags, gunfire in the alleys. The people, so long silenced, screamed with freedom. Élise was found barely alive in a prison hospital. Her ribs broken, eyes swollen, but breathing. She remembered nothing of her arrest, only that she had a name to hold on to. Thomas Hale, she told the nurse. If he writes, please, tell him I'm not dead. But the nurse never wrote. October 1944. Thomas returned to Paris as part of a civilian aid group. He walked every street, asked every contact, left notes at every embassy and cafe. No one had heard of Élise Laurent. No one had heard of Claire Martin. Then, one day, at a soup kitchen on Rue Saint-Antoine, a woman pointed him toward an old church. She comes to light candles, she said. She never speaks. And so he waited, until she stepped into the light again. Paris, 1945. The war was over, but the silence remained. Streets once filled with songs now carried only cautious footsteps. Élise walked through the city like a ghost. The bookstore was gone. Her father was gone. Her name no longer belonged to her. But Thomas, he was real. They met each day under the pale arches of the church courtyard. No grand declarations, only small moments. A hand on a sleeve. A glance that lingered. He found a small apartment near Montmartre. It had no heat, but it had a window with morning light. She moved in a week later. They slept side by side, not touching, not rushing, just breathing. She taught him how to cook again. He made her laugh again. And slowly, the silence cracked. They returned to the church where they reunited. This time not as soldiers or survivors, but as something still being written. They sat in the same pew, fingers intertwined. I didn't survive for medals, he whispered. I survived for you. She leaned into him. I stopped believing in God, but I never stopped believing in you. The priest found them that evening. He gave them tea and asked no questions. In the sacristy, beneath a flickering lamp, Thomas pulled out a box. Inside were the copies of every letter he had written but never sent. She opened the first and read until dawn. Some wounds refused to close. Thomas sometimes screamed in his sleep. Élise sometimes flinched at raised voices. They had arguments that ended in silence. Days they couldn't touch each other without remembering pain. But they also had breakfasts with burnt toast. Afternoons spent painting walls. Evenings reading aloud by candlelight. She planted flowers in rusted tins. He carved shelves from old crates. Every small act was a rebellion against what had been taken. They weren't perfect, but they were together. Spring 1946. The shop reopened with a new name. Librairie de Retrouvales, the bookstore of reunion. Neighbors returned with donations. Someone brought a bell for the door. Children ran inside to hear Élise read stories. Thomas taught English classes in the back room. Élise stocked shelves with titles in both languages. They added a small lending corner for those who couldn't afford books. People came not just to buy, but to heal. The bookstore became a sanctuary. So did they. They didn't want a spectacle, only a promise. They married in the garden behind the church. Just them, the priest, and a witness who cried more than the bride. Élise wore a dress she had sewn from scraps. Thomas wore his old uniform jacket. Instead of rings, they exchanged bookmarks from the first books they ever gifted each other. Later that night, they danced under string lights and silence. And in the attic of the bookstore, Élise found a sealed envelope, her father's handwriting. To my daughter in the life after war. Inside was a pressed violet and a single line. "Keep reading. He'll find you again." Months later, Élise brought out a small wooden box. It contained dozens of unsent letters, pages she had written during the darkest days of the occupation. Pages filled with fear, poetry, longing, and his name. They sat on the floor and read them all. She cried. He held her. "I thought I had lost you," she said. "You never did," he replied. "You were always the story I was trying to get back to." And as the city grew loud again, the two of them, forged by flame and words, built a quiet world from the ashes. Autumn 1946. One evening, as rain struck the windows of the bookstore, a man stepped inside. He was tall, with gray eyes and a limp. Élise knew him.
Luc Morel.
Once a fellow courier in the resistance, once a friend. He had vanished after a failed mission near the Loire Valley, presumed dead. Now he stood at their counter, holding an old copy of Le Comte de Monte Cristo. "I heard you opened a sanctuary," he said. "I need somewhere to remember who I used to be." Thomas was wary. Luc had secrets in his eyes. Over time, it became clear Luc had betrayed someone during the war. Perhaps not by choice. Perhaps under torture. But the guilt followed him like smoke. Élise forgave him. Thomas didn't. And the rift threatened the fragile peace they built. The city was rebuilding fast. Cafes reopened. Artists returned. Theaters raised curtains again. The bookstore grew busier. Thomas began holding poetry nights. Élise led workshops for young women. But success came with strain. Publishers demanded more. Customers wanted more. They barely had time for each other. "I miss when it was just us," she said one night. Thomas nodded. "We survived a war to build a life. Let's not lose it chasing more." They closed the shop for 3 days. Went to the countryside. Held hands. Remembered. On a gray December morning, a girl no older than 10 stood at their door. She carried a letter. "My mother said I'd find Élise here. Said you once saved her life." The girl's name was Colette. Her mother, Anne, had been a teenage courier Élise helped escape arrest, and had died of illness the year before. There was no family left. They took Colette in. First, it was temporary. Then it became permanent. She called Thomas Papa after 3 months. He cried in the back room where no one could see. Spring 1947. Thomas and Élise traveled to a small village in Normandy. A nurse who had tended to Élise in prison had passed away. Her daughter found an unsent letter addressed to Thomas. Never mailed. It read, "If you're alive, I hope you kept writing. I hope you never stopped believing in me. If this is the last thing I say, let it be this. I loved you when the world went silent." He placed the letter in a tin box beneath an oak tree and covered it with violets. 10 years since the war. The shop threw a celebration. Music, lanterns, readings in both French and English. Former soldiers, resistance fighters, children who had grown up with poetry. Thomas read a new poem. "We were born in fire / tempered by words / and now we live / like stories still being written." Élise kissed him after the last line. And the crowd applauded not for the poem, but for the life behind it. Decades later, the bookstore remained, now run by Colette and her own daughter. Thomas and Élise photos hung on the back wall. 2 young lovers with eyes that had seen war but chose peace. A young couple found a poetry book tucked behind a shelf. Inside was a note. "To the next ones who find love in ruins, may your pages be full." And in that small store, history whispered once more.